Idealism prevails. Make the world a better place.
I'm James Taylor, president of the Heartland Institute. The Heartland Institute is based in the USA outside Chicago. And what we do is we're a nonprofit policy organization, and we promote freedom-oriented solutions to the problems that confront society. We're best known for fighting back against climate alarmism. And the way we see it, and I think it's pretty accurate, is that the international left, political left, views climate change as their opportunity, their Trojan horse to impose socialism on the individual nations and the world as a whole. If you could convince the world that there's a climate crisis for which the only solution is giving money and power to government, and particularly international governance, because they say it's a global problem requiring global solutions, that's very risky. And if indeed we're baking the planet and we're facing a climate crisis, well, yeah, you have to do whatever you have to do to save it. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at the science, and we spend a great deal of time, effort, energy looking into the science and presenting the true science, we're not facing a climate crisis at all. Temperatures may be warming a little bit from a very cold period that existed for a long time, the Little Ice Age. But still, for most of the time that human civilization existed, temperatures were significantly warmer than today, and we managed quite fine with far less technology. So that's pretty much a summary of the Heartland Institute and why we're here in Vienna.
So, thank you very much. What do you think we should tackle? Like, what are the challenges that we have to tackle in the future, like politically wise, and mainly from the focus of the society? So, What is coming up, and what do we have to face?
All right. So, from our perspective, the biggest threat to freedom, and of course, we stand for freedom. So, we're going to fight for freedom and against a consolidation of power in government. We need to be on the lookout for this, because with the ongoing globalization movement, and then you have not just the United Nations, you have the World Economic Forum, you have the World Health Organization that is looking to have increasing powers to force individual nations to do what the World Health Organization says, based upon any number of so-called health crises, not just something like COVID, but even climate change. The World Health Organization is saying could be a potential health emergency that should give them power and authority. These are the things we have to be very careful about if we're going to maintain our freedom. Our freedoms individually and as individual nations, to be free from a global governance that may sound a little scary, may sound almost like a conspiracy theory, but that is what is going on in the world today. A gradual, but nevertheless constant increasing of power in these international organizations, and that's what we're trying to fight against.
How green are green energies in reality, in your opinion?
It's amazing when you think back to, for me, when I was a child, environmentalism meant land conservation, protecting open spaces, protecting individual species. And that has been turned on its head by the climate movement, the push for wind power and solar power. For example, in the United States, there was a study by professors at Harvard University, who, by the way, are very worried about climate change and are looking for solutions. And they investigated, if we were to transfer our electric grid from coal and natural gas and nuclear to wind power, what would that mean as far as how many wind turbines? And what they discovered is that we would have to cover literally 1/3 of the American landmass with wind turbines to replace conventional energy. I mean, think about the absolute environmental devastation. All of the open plains, all the forests that would have to be cut down, the shorelines that are now open and pristine, in which now we'd be seeing the offshore wind turbines, the birds and bat species that would be sliced to death in midair. And yet this is what we're told is environmentalism. It's no longer that the large established environmental organizations really care about the environment. What they care about is carbon dioxide emissions. And again, if we were facing some climate crisis that was risking extinction or all sorts of horrendous harms, okay, maybe you have to sacrifice for that. But it's not what we're facing. All that we're sacrificing right now is true environmental stewardship on the altar of fictitious climate change crisis.
Which of the prognoses that we had probably in the 70s, 80s are already true about reaching a threshold in 2030, maybe 50? Which of this is coming true, and what is like a fraud that you would, or maybe you would call it a fraud or misinterpretation, maybe?
Sure. When I joined the Heartland Institute in 2001, it was a time in which many of the asserted environmental problems of the 1970s either had been proven not to be as big a problem as had been feared, or if they were real problems, had largely been solved. And it's funny, I remember doing research into the large established environmental organizations, and they were putting out publicly, they were saying, we need to find some new environmental harm, threat that can galvanize people around the world, that's global in nature and serious, because they were losing influence. Nobody paid attention to them anymore because, well, air had been getting cleaner for years and years. Water had been getting cleaner. Yes, it's a good thing that we addressed substantial air pollution in the 1960s and 70s and water pollution. But by and large, we've been doing very well. In the USA, for example, there's been a decline. There's been a 70% decrease in pollutants admitted into the air since 1980. And even 1980 was 10 years or so of progress from 1970. You already had a significant amount of progress. So what we have now is the environmental movement that's looking for a cause, that's found their cause in climate change, global warming. But the true environmental problems that we used to face, again, either proven not to be as bad as thought, which is a good thing, or have been largely addressed, which is a good thing. And now, ironically, the same things that we're being told we need to do for climate change, clearing forests for wind turbines, putting wind turbines on open plains, mining rare earth minerals, which is just absolutely devastating environmentally. We have to do that en masse for the wind turbines and solar panels. We are creating environmental crises far worse than what we faced in the 1970s for no reason.
So, what do you say about the understanding that is going on around the world that the US and China are the main polluters of carbon dioxide in the world? Is this a lie that has been told, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's important to remember that carbon dioxide is not pollution. That's propaganda. That's what the environmental left wants us to believe, so that then they can impose all sorts of restrictions on us. Carbon dioxide is necessary for life on Earth. In fact, during the Little Ice Age, our carbon dioxide levels reached so low that we almost reached a point where life on Earth could not exist. Plants need carbon dioxide. Without carbon dioxide, there's no photosynthesis. Without plants, there's no animal life. When we look back at the history of the Earth, we still have much lower carbon dioxide levels than has been typically the case. We're now at about 400 parts per million. It's varied quite a bit over the Earth's history, but on average, it's been 1,000 parts per million or more. So we're not facing a carbon dioxide crisis where we have too much in the atmosphere, and it's not even pollution. There's no odor, there's no breathing difficulties or anything else. But as far as who's contributing the most carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, if we do believe in a climate crisis, well, China emits more than 30% of global emissions. The United States emits about 13% in second place. When you think about that, China emits more than twice as much as the United States, and the United States is second. So if we are going to have an impact on global carbon dioxide emissions, which is necessary if you believe in a global climate crisis, singling out the United States or any other country disproportionately makes no sense. The United States can eliminate all its emissions today, and it would only be a decade or two until it wouldn't matter, because the increase in emissions, on top of the 30+% that China is already emitting, and they're increasing all the time, would just wipe out those gains. So if we do believe in a climate crisis, we have to get to the root of the problem, which is China. In fact, since the turn of the century, over the past 24 years, The United States has reduced its emissions, its carbon dioxide emissions, more than any other country on Earth. For the extent that global emissions have increased, China by itself is responsible for 75% of the increase in carbon dioxide emissions. Again, if we want to act on the topic, exempting China from carbon dioxide emissions, which we are now currently doing, which the United Nations does. There's no requirements on China to reduce emissions, and China is not doing so. Then we're just barking up the wrong tree to no avail.
Okay. What is the public opinion if you compare it between the US and Europe? Do you see a shift of people understanding that the climate narrative might not be what we are told in the US? And how do you perceive it maybe in Europe or in other countries?
Yeah, I've been coming to Europe for 15 years or so, and it struck me throughout this time that Europeans in general seemed to believe the alarmist climate narrative much more so than people in the United States. And sometimes I wonder why that may be. I mean, I could speculate, I'm not sure. But I think that in America, there's been more dissemination of information that challenges the so-called climate crisis. At the Heartland Institute, that's what we do. We present the real science that scientists are reporting and discovering and presenting that gets shut down by the mainstream media that governments won't talk about. But we make it a point on our website, we make it a point to market the material on social media so that people can get the facts. And maybe in Europe you haven't had quite as much of that as you have in the United States. But it seems that in the past few years, there's been a significant change in Europe where people are increasingly looking into whether or not they've been told something that's not true. Even just a few years ago, well, really even just a year and a half ago, I was meeting with Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki from Poland. And he asked me to come to Warsaw and to talk with him about the topic. And he said, what you're saying is fantastic. It's brilliant. It's just hard because we have to comply with the European Union bureaucracy. And still people largely are not, they haven't heard these points. So it's an uphill battle. I'm not sure it's worth fighting. And now just a year and a half later, we see in the EU Parliament elections, the two factors, at least from what the media are reporting, that are driving the change in the electorate are immigration and the green transition. So people get it as far as the wind power, the solar power, the so-called climate solutions are imposing significant costs on European consumers. And where are all the benefits that were promised for all these extra expenditures? They're simply not there. So I think there's hope that that more realization of the realities of climate science and the economics are catching on here. And when I say hope, it's because if you're forcing people to use more expensive energy that's not reliable, that's extra expense that comes out of people's household budgets for nutrition, for education, for healthcare, for housing. These are all things that make life more healthier and enjoyable. But that's not the case if you're throwing it away needlessly on very, very poor energy options.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.